thank you all for joining us today for the Genocide and Human Rights Fall Webinar Series. I'm Megan Reed and I'm the Operations Coordinator for the Zorian Institute, and I'll be the moderator for today's session. This series was created in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, which unfortunately disrupted the Institute's annual Genocide and Human Rights University program that's hosted at the University of Toronto. After our first webinar series this past summer, we found that there was a great response from participants who wanted to learn more about the different cases and theories of genocide and human rights studies, so we're back with the fall session. My colleague Jenna will be posting more information about the Institute's Genocide and Human Rights University program and how to get involved in the chat box, so look out for that. A few housekeeping items before we begin. If you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A chat box or raise your hand and ask your question out loud. Discussion questions developed by the presenter will be posted in the chat box to get some ideas flowing. And there will be a 20 to 30 minute period to answer these questions at the very end of the session. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today's lecture, Anoush Baghdassarian, who will be discussing oral history, human rights, and the law, the importance of preserving testimonies for justice efforts. Anoush Baghdassarian is a JD candidate at Harvard Law School. She has a master's in human rights studies from Columbia University and a bachelor's in psychology and genocide studies from Claremont McKenna College. She is co-founder of the Rerooted Archive, documenting over 200 testimonies from Syrian Armenian refugees who have fled Syria in the last 10 years. She has a career focus on transitional justice and international criminal law, and some of her work experience includes interning as an advisor to the Armenian Permanent Mission to the UN and serving as an upcoming visiting professional at the International Criminal Court. Anoush also enjoys playwriting and has written 2 historical fiction plays, one about the Armenian genocide and the other in Spanish about Argentina's last military dictatorship. So Anoush, welcome, and we're so happy to have you here with us today.
Thank you, Megan. It's a real honor, and thank you for the really generous introduction. And I want to thank the Zorian Institute for hosting this webinar series, and also Federico Jairabedian from the Luisa Jairabedian Foundation in Argentina, who introduced me to the Zorian Institute and the amazing work that you all do. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I will start sharing my screen. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming. Let's see if I can figure out this technology, even though I shouldn't have a problem with it, given school is Zoom these days. Let me start presenting. And bear with me while I figured out how to do this notes mode so I can see my notes while I speak. Okay, Megan, can you see everything okay?
Yep, it all looks perfect.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks so much.
No problem.
All right, so, let me close the window so we don't have it long more. Okay, so welcome everybody to this presentation, Oral History, Human Rights and the Law, the Importance of Preserving Testimony for Justice Efforts. So today I'll speak a little bit about oral history, human rights and the law and that topic. And although I won't be able to address everything that I wish I could communicate about this in 1 hour, I'll present a brief overview of transitional justice tools aided by and founded on testimony, and discuss the benefits of oral history and the benefits it can bring to this field of transitional justice through my own example of the Rerooted Archive that I, along with my colleague Ani Shug, began 3 years ago. But before we get into the substance of the presentation, I wanted to ask you all if you could go to this poll, please. Unfortunately, I don't know if you can, when someone posts in a chat, you can copy and paste, but let's see if you can. But otherwise, you can just type it here. Either you can text this number or combination of letters and numbers, or you can go to this link and write one word of what comes to mind when you think of oral history. So if you want to write multiple words, you can, but just include them as separate entries so that if you say, you're not going to say this, but if you say water and cup, for example, if you put it as one entry, it'll write water cup. So please write them as different entries. We're going to come back to this later on in the presentation. So do that now while I'm talking, that would be great. Did everybody have a chance to get this link? Is there any problems? You think? All right.
It's in the chat box now. So Jenna has posted it, so you should be able to see it there. So you can copy and paste into yeah, it's there.
Fantastic. Okay, thanks. So if everyone could, write down what comes to mind when you think of oral history. Great. So the next thing we'll talk about is the basics of transitional justice. So what is transitional justice? Well, from the International Center for Transitional Justice, they define an NGO that works a lot in post-conflict societies trying to bring and establish transitional justice. They define it as transitional justice refers to the ways countries emerging from periods of conflict and repression address large-scale or systematic human rights violations so numerous and so serious that the normal justice system will not be able to provide an adequate response. And so there are different definitions of transitional justice, and most scholars agree that transitional justice refers to measures that are implemented in order to redress the legacies of massive serious crimes under international law. So some of those crimes could include genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and they call for a number of mechanisms to try to make victims whole again. Neil Krstić, and so as you can see in this image, there's truth, accountability, reconciliation, reparation. These are some of the elements of transitional justice. Neil Krstić, who's a scholar of transitional justice, he argues that there are four basic, objectives of any transitional justice program. And they're the following four. So determining the truth by establishing a record of human rights abuses, obtaining justice, ensuring meaningful democratic reform, entrenchment of the rule of law within society, and building a society with institutions that ensure the kinds of abuses being dealt with will not recur, and achieving durable peace with assurance that a return to violence is fairly unlikely. So given that these are, some of the objectives of a transitional justice program, well, how are those implemented? How can we achieve those? Well, this is where we have to delve into and I promise I won't get more technical, but this is where we'd have to delve into the two different types of different types of justice. There are others as well, such as procedural and distributive, but these are two of the ways to break down justice within transitional justice processes. So retributive and restorative justice refer to two different aspects. So retributive justice is a perspective that focuses on punishment for offenders, while restorative justice focuses on the relationship between the offender and the victim. So retributive justice is what you think about when you, want there to be some type of punishment. So you think of a typical criminal proceeding, or the creation of an ad hoc tribunal. For example, we saw this with the former Yugoslavia and with Rwanda, where the UN helped create ad hoc tribunals because they, to supplement what was happening already in the national criminal procedure. So for example, Rwanda had gacaca courts, which were community-led courts that helped the transitional justice process. And they also had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and this ad hoc tribunal helped supplement that by bringing justice out, bringing in maybe neutral or people who weren't part of the past regime to help with the justice efforts. So that is those are retributive aspects. The restorative aspects, I'm sorry, one second. Megan, can you hear me, or is it too loud?
I can hear you. Is it a lawnmower in the background?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. You can faintly hear it, but I can hear you well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me see. Okay. Let me see if I can do something. Sorry.
No problem.
I don't think it's going to change anything, but maybe they'll stop soon. Okay. If it gets too bad, please let me know, and maybe I'll move somewhere else.
Okay.
Is it okay now? Is it or is it very bad? Sorry.
No, we can easily hear what you're saying. You can just hear a little bit of noise in the background. Yeah.
Okay, so apologies, everyone. Restorative justice focuses on making the victim whole again. There are a number of different ways to do that, and that includes truth commissions, public education, community level initiatives, memorialization, development of new symbols and images. So I can give a few examples of these. So the memorialization, for example, when I was living in Berlin, and some of you have been to Germany maybe know this, they have these cobblestones on the floor called Stoppelstein. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but those are plaques on the ground that memorialize when, for example, somebody was taken from that house and sent to a concentration camp. And they also have plaques on the train platforms on some of them saying, you know, this train track transported individuals from this year to Auschwitz or to this camp, etc. And so it's a way of always keeping that history alive and memorializing it in a way that allows the victims to feel that what their harms have been addressed and that the society recognizes it. And that's, you know, a huge step in favor of not having there be any type of impunity or recurrence of the violence. And so you also have the development of new symbols and images, for example, if there was some type of image that was, you know, discriminatory or harmful to a certain group, removing those symbols and images to kind of start new again is a way to focus on making the victim, you know, feel welcome in society and whole again. Historical dialogue is trying to bring communities together that might have, you know, that might have been at intention in the conflict. So if you think of in Rwanda, the Hutus and the Tutsis, and other things like proper burials for the dead, or reparations, either financially or you know, even you know, return of historical land. There are different ways that restorative justice can be achieved. So on the aspect of truth and reconciliation commissions, I think that's probably one of the, just like maybe it comes to mind, criminal proceedings come to mind for retributive, I think truth and reconciliation commissions come to mind for many people when they think of restorative. And there have actually been around 50 truth and reconciliation commissions around the world, at least in modern history. And it's impressive how much people really want to get to the truth of what happened and understand, you know, how they can live together again. So that brings me to this idea of victim-centered transitional justice. So in order to understand what kind of justice individuals want and how they can feel safe living in a new society after some type of atrocity crime, we need to speak to them. We need to hear from them what they want, because not every transitional justice mechanism is right for every context. So there are many scholarly criticisms that the field of transitional justice lacks voices from the ground regarding satisfactory redress mechanisms. And you know, the criticisms say that since each transitional justice context is unique, it's not possible to make valid generalizations about the effectiveness of specific devices. And so for that, you know, it's important to look at specific contexts in order to understand and help the individuals within a specific community. So I want to bring up this quote that talks about the importance of the interview, which is what I was saying just before with the victim-centered testimonies and victim-centered transitional justice. So the interview in different guises, contexts, and settings is at the heart of most transitional justice processes. Prosecutorial mechanisms, truth recovery commissions, assessments for reparations, applications for amnesty, all of these are fueled by the art of one human being interviewing another and then presenting or representing the material recorded to make it fit with the broader transitional goals of a particular institution. So why is it important to interview? Because it gives us a better understanding of what the diverse community of victims wants for justice in a particular setting. And many of these interview-based projects, whether they're from history or anthropology or social sciences or folklore or law, embrace elements of oral history. And so in many ways, oral history is an interdisciplinary field. And just to send home the point about how important it is to interview and just speak with people on the ground about what justice they would like. The International Center for Transitional Justice that I mentioned earlier produces reports and often about how, what the people on the ground might want for justice. And so they did a report for Syria 2 years ago where they said, in the absence of any foreseeable transitional justice documentation efforts, transitional justice documentation efforts can help potential transitional justice processes. So the examples they provide are representative of what might be important indicators of justice in a post-conflict setting. So ICTY will do qualitative surveys that elicit opinions, which are centered on conditions for return, resettlement, rebuilding. And when they did the Syrian survey, they found that most displaced Syrians that they spoke with were concerned with restoring security before attaining any criminal justice, which is similar to what I'll show later, one of the surveys that I had done with my Syrian Armenian respondents, and that was similar, that most were not focused on criminal proceedings and didn't want that at this stage, but rather they wanted there to be safety and stability and protection for minorities in the country. So just pushing home the idea that it's important to understand what the people on the ground want. So how can oral history help with that? Well, that's where we turn to what is oral history. So this is where I want to see what all of you said. If you haven't had a chance to fill out the poll, please do that. But let's go to the poll results and see what you all said. I hope this works. I think it will. Oh no, I am the owner, but I think I have the owner. I have it on my other computer. Let me activate it here and I'll tell you all what it says.
Perfect.
So what comes to mind? Oh, great. You have really great images. So you guys said, I wish you could see it, but you guys said stories is the most, I can put it, it's okay. Stories is what you said. You said history, writing, testimony, memory. Let me see. I can put it in the 1 second. I'll take a screenshot of it and I'll put it in the chat, or not chat, but the PowerPoint. Let's see. So what is oral history? Bear with me 1 minute. Apologies. Image. Results. Okay, let's see if Google Slides updates immediately. Let's see if we see it next. Oh, it didn't work. Let me refresh this.
Yeah.
Let's see. So it's slow, but it's here. Perfect. So what is oral history? Let's see what you all had to say. Wow. Loading. Here we go. So stories, history, writing, memory, and testimony seem to be the things that stand out most. So I'd like to actually call on people and see who might want to explain or share what they said and why they said it.
And if you just raise your hands, I'll unmute you so you can, I'll give you the access to speak.
Anybody? I'm gonna ask.
Give a few.
Oh, great.
So David.
Hi, David. Which one did you write?
Mine had to do with stories and writing, and history actually too. And I wrote something to the effect of that. I think of oral history as being stories that are maintained often without writing, and that are maintained through oral storytelling traditions that can be passed down in a culture.
That's fantastic. And when you think of history, how do you think oral history supplements other types of written history. Is it, do you think it supplements it? Do you think it adds some type of benefit to the record?
I think it can get at kind of a cultural feel or cultural or particular groups that may have a tradition of oral history rather than written history. And so it's a way to kind of to reach those groups and to learn from them. I think it's also just a way of getting a feel for a culture and its tradition that is separate from what may have been written before.
Fantastic answer. You should be up here with me giving the presentation. Thanks, David. Anybody else want to add?
We do. Jen has her hand up.
Okay. Hi, Jen.
Hey, I think I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I put similar things to David. I put stories and memory was the first one I put. Thinking of oral history, I know we're going to talk a little bit about when it's quite recently after maybe a historical event, but I also think of oral history as memory later on, maybe down the road a little bit, and how that memory or these recollections or anecdotes can round out the written history that we've come to know. So even decades later, or even sometimes just years later, the written history, we can fill things in, or I think David made a good point when he said the feel of the culture, something like that. And I think you get that from memories a lot of the time.
Exactly, that's a fantastic answer. And I think that we'll see when we go to explaining what oral history is, we'll see, oops, apologies, that oral history does do exactly that and does help the shaping of memory. It's going, I'll say this right now as we get to the next slide, but you're exactly right. So let me touch on your point right now as we go to explaining what oral history is and how it can, let's see, how it can help fill in the gaps. So this is the slide that talks about, so there are some, I have a bibliography for all of you afterwards if you want to learn more and read more about it, about oral history. I think that something important is that the Columbia University Oral History Master's Program has a lot of great guides, and this is where I've gotten this from, that says that oral history is about collecting life narratives and community narratives and cultural memories, like all of you have said. And it's, you know, a lot of it comes from, a lot of what's important about oral history is the process of memory making and how people, when they speak and when they are recalling memories, how they're shaping it as they're speaking. And so, and the next slide, I'll speak a little bit about how it's more about the meaning of events than actually capturing the facts of the events exactly correctly. And so I think that goes to what Jen has just said about how it's about how a community has shaped their own narratives and their memories through the process of telling their stories. So we have here, as I just said, the different types of forms of oral history: life narratives, community narratives, and cultural memories. And then there's also different genres. And so there's the quality of the relationship between the interviewer and the narrator is characterized by openness and equality. The interviewer is not just, you know, sitting on the side or observing. Actually, the product that you come out with at the end of an oral history has a lot to do with the narrator and the questions they ask, the way they responded to the person's testimony. And so it's a collaborative process. And it also includes, has a focus on the movement of stories through time, the crystallization of memories into narratives, and the creation and recreation of narratives, so how it's fluid in its explanatory power. Again, touching on what Jen just said. And I think this quote in the top right is important because I just want to show how it says some narrators might refer, this is from an Iraq archive, it says some narrators might refer to the March 2003 events in Iraq as an invasion, others might call it liberation. The term that we choose as interviewers can affect how the interview goes. And I think that's really important because a lot of what I'll talk about in the justice process of how oral history can help fill gaps in the justice processes for transitional justice is that it can help reconcile conflicting narratives of conflicting realities. And so typically, you know, when you're giving a testimony for an affidavit, or when you are doing some type of Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which we'll see, you get targeted questions that are asking you about a specific event, and you have to respond in the way that the question is posed. And it's oftentimes more scripted or manipulated than allowing you to explain what you felt the events were and how they unfolded, without giving any type of bias in the way that you ask questions. So let's go to what makes oral history different. So oral history provides a historical record of what happened and its multiple impacts on individuals, both across and within communities, and it allows people to contribute to something for posterity as part of a collective. So if there's an archive, the people feel like their story is existing in a larger archive of stories about the same experience, or with people within their community, and whatever the scope is. And there's something empowering about that, about existing in the larger archive. They're not alone in a sense, and they're creating something. Next, oral history tells us less about events and more about their meaning. And so oral sources don't just tell us what you did, but what the person wanted to do, what they believe they were doing, what they now think they did, reflecting on it back from now into the past. And so it doesn't imply that oral history has no factual validity, because interviews often do reveal unknown events or unknown aspects of known events. And they can always cast a new light on unexplored areas of the daily life of you know, non-hegemonic classes, and so it's important to not discount their validity, but while also recognizing that the speaker's subjectivity is unique and a very precious aspect of oral history, because what's really important is that memory is not a passive depository of facts, but it's an active process of creation of meanings. And so the specific utility of oral sources for the historian lies in their ability to preserve the past, as in through the very changes wrought by memory. And so these changes reveal the narrator's effort to make sense of the past and to give a form of their lives based in the broader historical context. And then oral history functions alternatively to other historical processes, as it's history from the bottom up. It's everyday people making history. People who don't usually have the historical authority now have an interpretive historical authority over their own history. And then lastly, oral history, or one point on that is that no one else is interpreting it, you know, as opposed to a historian who maybe is setting out to write a book and says that they are exercising their authority over the interpretive processes and their biases onto the subjects. This is really the subject speaking. And lastly, oral history allows people to define trauma for themselves. And so because of the narrative space it opens up, it's not, you know, no one's imposing something on you. It should feel collaborative as opposed to extracting information or only making people feel valuable for certain parts of their life. And so the fact that the person gets to choose what to tell you already gives them an agency that other methods don't. And so when you're thinking about criminal or testimony in a court, for example, that's an opportunity. It might be an opportunity for someone to process their trauma or be deeply listened to, but you know, it's not really directly for them. It's to receive information for the court to fit the contours of the case. And so, you know, something that's important about oral history is that it doesn't have a lot of those constraints that aren't negatives in those other contexts, but just it shows that oral history can has an added value. So how can oral history fill the gaps left by others in other transitional justice processes? We'll watch two clips now to show you the difference a little bit of how different testimonies are presented in different contexts. So as I said before, there's the International Criminal Court for the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, ICTY. And here is a testimony. And you'll see, I just want to preface it with, you know, as I said before, when you are presenting in a court, you know, you've worked with a lawyer and you've been maybe not, you know, you're not told what to say, but you've been guided on the things that maybe might help the legal case. So for example, with genocide, something important is that there was intent, or that, you know, it was systematic or planned. And so those words, I'm not sure if they'd be necessarily something that a person says when they're telling their testimony, but you can see here that maybe it was a little bit guided.
From all of what I have said and what I saw, I could come to the conclusion that this was extremely well organized. It was systematic killing.
So,
and that the organizers of that do not deserve to be at liberty. And if I had the right and courage, in the name of all those innocents and all those victims, I would forgive the actual perpetrators of the executions because they were misled. That's all.
So that's one example of at the end I'll ask your opinions at the end of this next clip. One example of a portion of somebody's testimony of their story and their life.
From all of whatever.
And then the next slide, you'll see this is the Truth and Reconciliation and Reparations Commission of the Gambia, which is actually ongoing now. And this is Alieu Jang, one of the junglers, somebody who is part of the government's, the ex-president of the Gambia, Yahya Jammeh. This man Alieu Jang is part of his one of his killing units or paramilitary units called the Junglers. So here I want to show you how he's not able to give his whole life story, and that's not what the point of this is. The point of this is for him to answer questions about what they think he did and what he's alleged of doing. But it doesn't give much room for somebody to present themselves in the best light, or it doesn't give much room for somebody to explain how they perceived the events, and maybe that's not something that is necessary. You might not think it's necessary at this point, but again, it's just showing that oral history can fill that gap when you do think it's necessary.
People, the victims that you took from the point where they were dropped off to the point where they were shot and killed by Malik Jata and Sana Manjang. Can you tell us how many were there?
ñooñu nga xam ne ñoom ngeen yóbbu woon li ko dalee fa nga xam ne fa ngeen leen wàccee ak bi ngeen di ñëw di leen yëkkati di leen yóbbu ca Malik Jata ak Sana Manjang ndax mun ngaa xam ñoom ñaata lañ woon.
I mean him personally.
yow ci sa bopp.
dama mun naa xam ñoom ñaata lañ woon. déedéet mun naa xam ñaata lañ woon de wax dëgg yàlla.
No, I cannot tell how many they were, honest to God. If the evidence we received before this commission is that the victims were brought in batches of 15.
seede yi nga xam ne moom lañ jot fii ci commission bi mooy ne dañ leen doon jël di leen boole ci ay mbooloo yoo xam ne bu ci nekk toll na ci fukk ak juróom par fukk ak juróom lañ leen doon indi.
What do you say about that?
loo wax ci loolu.
su fekkee ne ñi gaa yi indi woon toll nañ ci ay juróom fukk. man ci suma gis-gis. waaw
fukk ak juróom.
waaw fukk ak juróom waaw.
15.
waaw man li ma mun a faasal su fekkee ne dafa war a nekk ñaari fukk ak juróom dafa nekk comme ñetta fukk waaye man ci suma gis-gis su fekkee ne mun naa fàttaliku ñi ma fa gis aguñ ñetta fukk.
If you draw the microphone closer to you so that you don't necessarily have to lean forward.
If they were brought in batches of 15, then what I saw was only 2 batches of 15 and not up to 3 batches of 15.
No, he didn't say that. I think there's a mistake. Could you repeat what you said?
So I want to hear your reactions, but what I wanted to point out with that is just that it seems like they're clearly looking for an answer, and they know the facts, they know, or at least they think, they have an idea of what happened, and they're looking for him to fill in pieces, and they're, it's an investigative mechanism trying to piece together what happened, versus oral history, which focuses more on understanding how somebody perceived an event, understanding how it fits in with their context of who they are, how they grew up, their community. And when we move to Rerooted, which we'll do in a second, you'll see the difference a bit in these testimonies. But I'm curious if anybody else has reactions to these two, Truth and Reconciliation Commission and Tribunal mechanisms of transitional justice.
And again, just raise your hand and I will select your name and unmute you.
You can think about it also as we get to the oral history portion, but I just wanted to, I don't want to talk so much. I wanted to open it up and see if anybody wanted to add anything or comment or make an observation, question. Okay, should we move on? Okay, so.
People, the victims that you took.
No. So the difference, let's see. So oral history, moving into that, and then actually I do have another question I see for all of you. These are some examples of oral history archives. So I just wanted to show you, for example, so these are just some examples. There are many. The Redemption Project, the 1947 Partition Archive, Guantanamo Public Memory Project, and then this Starkville Civil Rights page. I wanted to show this one to you all and just show you how it's different from those other two processes and how it still contributes to justice. So you have here people, and if you go to someone's interview, let's just click here, Nancy, you know, you can see how the testimony talks about, it seems, it's just from looking at the down here, you know, it has her personal background, how when she moved to the town, what it was like being in the high school, how big her family is, you know, the first 5 integrated students, you know, what is home for her, what is her work history, and it's a long list of questions about her life. What brings you joy? It's a way for, it's a process that can inform a sense of a community. So they're trying to figure out, you know, what is this a community, what makes them different, what is their shared values, and what is justice for them, while also understanding the person, because by understanding the person's context, you can understand, I think, better the community. So going back to the presentation now, I wanted to ask all of you, if you could start your own oral history archive, which community might you focus on and why? I wanted to open this up now and then also readdress it at the end after I show Rerooted, but I wanted to just bring this up and ask people if they have any thoughts on this.
Hi, Jen. Can you hear us?
Hi Anoush. Thanks for such a great first half of the presentation. I was thinking about this a little bit. I saw the question in the chat, and I think if I had to start one, I would probably look at the Highlands of Scotland, and I'd only say the Highlands in particular because there are 3 Indigenous languages within Scotland, English, Gaelic, and Scots. The 2 latter are more prevalent in the Highlands at the moment, and if anyone's familiar with kind of Scottish culture, folklore and tradition is a big part, or was at least for a very long time a big part. And I say Scotland as well because I'm interested in understanding Scottish history as it stands alone from British history, and oral tradition in Gaelic and in Scots was a really big part of Scottish history over the years. So I think that's the community I would focus on, maybe with a focus on work or how traditional farming methods and community building changed after industrialization. Most Scottish people now live in big cities or in towns. Yeah, that's I think what I would focus on.
Wow, I don't know much about that community, and that's really interesting. And I think that you touched on a lot of important elements that, you know, aren't really touched on in a transitional justice procedure like a criminal tribunal or a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So I think that's a perfect example. So thanks for sharing that.
No problem.
Does anyone else want to share? You can share at the end too, if you'd like. All right, I'm gonna go forward then. And I'm going to just briefly talk about, I think this is, I think the beginning of the part of the presentation is interesting, and it's all the background of education, but I'm really excited about this part because it's what I know best, and it's Rerooted. So this is the archive that 3 years ago, I had the idea to begin, and I went to my friend Ani Shub, who is, we had started the Armenian Club together in college, and she is absolutely fantastic. And I don't know, this wouldn't be anything without her, and so I'm sad she can't be here to present with me, but I'm going to try to do justice on my own. So what led to Rerooted, and what is it? It's an oral history archive of over 200 Syrian Armenian testimonies, and some of the things that inspired me to create it are the three things I have up here. So first, humanizing statistics. So in March 2020, I think, in March of 2020 this year, it was estimated that about 5.6 million Syrians are refugees and 6.2 million people are displaced. But I remember in 2016, I remember hearing numbers like that, 4 million refugees and all the statistics, but it didn't seem like people in my circles at least were really doing much. And we were in college, and so maybe, I don't know, that might be part of it, but still, I think my point is that when this image came out, this very sad image, it began to humanize the conflict. And I saw, at least in my circles and in people around me and on the news, it seemed like people were remobilized for Syria and cared a lot about trying to help. And so I think that there was a part of oral history that is incredibly powerful for humanizing otherwise dire and saddening statistics, and engaging people in ways that are important to help for justice. So then I was then working at Human Rights Watch, and this man, Suleiman Geng, had just successfully won his case along with, he's not a lawyer, but his lawyers won the case against the ex-dictator of Chad, Hassan Habre. And this man was really inspiring because he would come back and forth at the office, and my desk was right by his, where he was working, and he'd come and tell me stories. And he's told me that he was tortured by Habre and his government. And when he got out and survived being tortured, he said, we have to collect these testimonies. We have to document what's happening. And people told him, no, that's crazy. There's never going to be justice. You shouldn't do that. And he did it. And as this New York Times excerpt shows, the evidence, it says, Mr. Geng, 52, has done something extraordinary. He fought back. After being unjustly imprisoned and tortured for 2 years in the late 1980s, he spent the next decade gathering testimony from fellow victims and their families. And the evidence provided critical material for the Chadian and international human rights organizations to pursue the case against Habre. And it took 17 years to get justice, at least when the lawyers came in, and before that he was collecting testimonies. So I think in total he says it was 26 years of him fighting for justice, but he got it. And a lot of it came from him documenting these histories and these oral testimonies and capturing from people what it is that happened to them. So I thought, wow, that's another example of the power of testimony and humanizing people. And then I saw this, I was looking at the Armenian context, and I had been seeing awful things happening to the Syrian Armenians in Syria, but a lot of the focus, I was working on a lot of Syria projects at Human Rights Watch through my internship, and a lot of them focused on the Muslim majority of Syria, which is understandable because they are the larger population of the country, and but nevertheless, the ethnic and religious minority stories, I was not seeing them in mainstream media as much. And these two examples that I have here, one is from 2012, one is from 2016, and they're both published by Armenian news outlets. So, you know, this Syrian Armenian community had been displaced before 100 years ago. Their ancestors survived the Armenian genocide and fled to Syria. And I thought, well, you know, we know all too well as Armenians that when you know, what it feels like to not have justice. And so many groups feel that, unfortunately, in the world. And so part of that was not only because, but part of that comes from the fact that this regime of even the word genocide, or understanding, you know, how to process genocide and how to react to it and respond to it, didn't come until after the Holocaust in 1948. And so, you know, because of either a lack of documentation, a lack of any of these transitional justice processes being fully formed. There was no immediate justice right after the genocide for Armenians, but I thought, if documenting testimonies was something we were missing, well, that doesn't have to be the case this time. We can document those testimonies and we can preserve that history so that one day, if anybody does want justice, any Armenian does want some type of retributive or restorative justice, these testimonies can be preserved. But also, it wasn't just justice that I wanted to preserve, but it was this really strong Syrian Armenian community. It was, over 100,000 Armenians were living in Syria when the war began, and now there's less than 20,000. And so, they were one of the strongest diaspora communities in the sense that they had really strong Armenian educational institutions, really strong churches, community centers. A lot of the Armenians didn't really interact with people outside of their Armenian community. And so it was important to me and Ani to preserve a snapshot of that community that had been displaced, and who many of our narrators who spoke to us said they're not sure if they will go back or if the community will ever return to what it once was. So I want to show you the archive a little bit, and I want to play some videos for you, but first I'll just show you here. These are some of our informants and our narrators, and we've interviewed over people who have fled Syria and gone to over 10 different countries. So we're still collecting interviews, still interviewing, and here I'll go to the archive and I'll show you what one of the interviews looks like. So we have here, it will be eventually, we hope, in Arabic and English and Armenian, all of it. But let's say we want to go to Ani, who she has, here's a quote from her. She says, "Armenian education in the diaspora is a big responsibility. We need to not only teach Armenian reading, writing, grammar, and literature, but we also need to familiarize students with the nation's values and heroes so that they can feel proud and grounded. I tried to do that as an Armenian teacher for 10 years. So now she's living in social housing in Armenia, and you have here her English transcript, her Armenian transcript, and something really cool about this, Ani and I really like this. It's called Amara. It's a subtitling tool, and you can go through it and scroll through it and click the section that you want to go to, and it'll take you there in the interview. And this person, Ani, didn't want her video to be recorded. She just wanted her voice. And so you see it jumps as you, if you see the gray box, you see it's going along with 500 years, whatever she's saying, and you can click any part that you want. So anyway, that's just a quote tool of the testimonies, the oral histories, and we also wanted to explain the history to people, and so we've created this kind of interactive history area. We eventually want an interactive map, but we'll get there one day. If any of you have really great tech skills and want to help, please let us know. But we have here, and this is how we structured our interviews, through 5 themes: genocide, life in Syria, life during the war, leaving Syria, your journey out of Syria, and life in your new country. So some of the historical themes here are then, you go to the genocide and you see, for the vast majority of Syrian Armenians, their family histories in Syria begin with the events of the genocide. And so we talk about that. And we have in this map different points of where, so you can visualize, in Turkey, they came from over, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but they came from here, Adana, Gaziantep, these areas of eastern Turkey. And they went to Aleppo right there, which is right over the border, and some other cities in Syria. And then, we have the Deir Zor Desert, which is in Syria now, and demonstrating where those, death marches happened, and how they, survived and found their way to becoming refugees in Syria and building their own communities. And so that's that part of the map. And then you can scroll through yourself at a different time, but we have political changes and how it's really important to understand the context of how different political parties affected Armenians. So when the French mandate was in place, Armenians had some protections versus when the Pan-Arabism happened. They lost, for example, their ability to learn Armenian in schools or to have their own cultural institutions as publicly as they used to. And then you have the war, and we'll discuss that. and how it affected the Syrian Armenian communities. And then we have targeting of Armenians by some of the terrorist groups, and then a loss of community, and then we get to the second displacement, that now the Armenians have fled to different areas. You know, this woman, if any of you have been to Armenia and tried za'atar pizza, she is a Syrian, a woman from Syria, and you know, Armenians have gone to Lebanon, a lot of them, Europe. We interviewed some people in Europe, in France and Switzerland, and beyond. And so this girl's in the U.S. And so that was, let me get off of this. So that, I just wanted to show you the archive. It's not actually fully live yet, that website, because we're still working on it. But I want to show you the video now of one of our interviews.
Եթե իրական սիրտ ունի այդ բարեկտուն որ միդենս տո երթային երախան Աստված մի որ բարեսիտ մեգելով բարեսիտ զինվոմներ իդ անստանկիլը դարձուցին Սովետ գյուղը դարձիպած առանց մեգի դեմ նայելու Մարտը բոնալ արավ անստանկինան արավ եւ ճապա դարձավ բայց այդ մարտը որ չլար անգարելի որ մեգը գնա հասցնել Արդեն ապահով էցան մեր զորքին մեր շրջաները մտան Ալի ամենամեծ պարկներ բայց կմնա գինս որ Չէր ոչ մեկ պարկ միան ուլար զավակներս պիտի տեսնեն բայց Հոմսքյորի մեջ են ինչեւ իրեն զավակներու տասնից 8-9 ժամ ուզես եւ ճամփաներ ռիսկ փակեն նորեն կիցածեն են չմնաց բայց վերջավորության մայրեր շատ զորավոր ռիսկի մեջ մտավ առանց մերուն բամասել լսեցինք որ մի քանի ժամ ճամփան բացվել արդեն լինդան ճամփան Արդեն ռիսկ չեմ գարասել քեզի որ իսկական քրկը գլուխ մարդ դեռ անգարելի որ ճամփայի եւ ավտոբուսի մեջ երևակայ մեծ ավտոբուսները որ կան դղամարդ այդանասներում մեջ ինչը որ միլիկա երախաները տեսնել ինձ ճամփան ինձ կսպանեն ինձ ճամփան կողանան ինչ ուզեն թողնել բայց պիտի հասնի երախաներս ոչ մեկը ոչ երախոսի չէ դրասվում Նման անչափեցի երախոսի որ մենք ոչ մեկ չի կապի ինչեւ կոմսլասնի շեմս չենոս ուրիշ դեր հաստուցնձի անդրել ուրիշ օտոարի սիգարեգորը հալեբեն դուրսել ամենամեծ ռիսկն որ հալեբեն դուրսել արդեն ելարն արդեն անդեր 1000 ժամ կարողնես իրենց ասախտուն վոլից մեջ են կլիպանան գերտա ման ճամփան դարբերը սա մենք քեզի չեն գնամից դու ճամփան Դեպարանի սահմանը ցկել ու ուզես ցկես ուզիչ յան հանը ինչ ուզես դամ քեզի դրա մարտելը սեսա դրա մազը սեսա հիմա դու փոցյունսի դնստինցերը բիդմերնիս բիդաբրիս մես կուրդե մեդ գիրին սպիդելի
So that is just you know, a really powerful story, a really powerful excerpt of some of our narrators, and that was just a shortened video that Ani and I have made to be about the war, to show that portion. But this interview was, you know, many hours long and discussed a lot more, and so I wanted to show you all actually the kind of questions we asked. But I want to explain that, you know, the question template that you can have going into oral history should be fluid. It should not, just like I said before, one of the faults or one of the gaps that oral history can fill is that it's not trying to extract certain information. So Ani and I went in with a general arc of what we'd like to ask these 5 groups: genocide, life in Syria, war, leaving Syria, life in your new country. And we have, you know, some people, they speak in narrative form and speak very, very long and give you a story every time you ask a question. And others speak and then they answer with 1 word or 2 words. And so, you know, these prompting questions are helpful for them to expand more on what they like to say. And so these are just some examples. If you want the slides later, I can show. You can feel free to see this more, but just to show the structure. And then, because I also wanted to show it's not just about war, it's also about preserving identity and what it meant to be Syrian, Armenian. So I want to show this video.
Գրթությունը, քաղաքավարություն եւ այլն նոր թուղի բաժնի մեջ կպատկաներ։ Ինչպես կսեմ, հատկանքը սիպերնուսմանն, բայց ավելի ցանկը, ավելի մոդությունը, բարեկամությունը, ինգերությունը դասկայ որ նոր թուղի բաժնի մեջ էր։ Ավելի սրդով ամուր, մեգամիսի օկնող, բազող ժողովուրդը, հատկանքը սմիս բաժներուն նոր թուղի մեջ է։ Իսկ այլասներով բարակականի իբր իմ Abras tavamasas laman sur kevol ki yeretin bartanantin kognerin kumis. Persen interes meçe aylat kutun şatkarpats aylat paselomik nagadi bidarnik ne yes cheyes karvol irets aylat ken Անկան որ հարքան կար, այնքան որ երբ որ հակառակ բարակային թավի մեջ օդար անձնավորությունը մտներն է, այսինքն սկայ որ իրենց ու գրնագը դեն եղբայրները դեն իրենց քեզ գբաշխանեին։ Անավար ես չեմ սկացած որ մեծերն դարիքս դեմ արած է, այլացքի հայության դարբերություն չեմ սկացած անգարելի է։ Սուրիացի կամ հայսերով այսինքն մենք հալեբի մեջը կամ Սուրիայի մեջը արդեն մեր մոդը չի գար հայես այլացքես եւ անփոլորնա սուրիացին մեկ խոսք այդ դարբերությունը չենք գիտեր որ մինչեւ որ ասնյութերը ելա եւ ես մինչեւ այսօր թեր ընկերուներ ունեմ եւ այլն որ իրենց այլացքը լալով իրենց ամեն վարյան հետ սկսխոսին եւ իմ մասից հետաքրքրվին եւ ես չեմ սկար որ իրենց այլացք են ես այդ դարբերությունը իբր իմ սկացումից չեմ սկացած սուրիացին չի գա հայ այլացք Մեկ կարճ բդրուկ խոս Հայաստանը բաբայի իբր թուն հայ անունը Սուրիանը մամայի որ դարերով կեզին այցա
So just an example to show how people really spoke about a range of things and really captured a snapshot of what it meant to be Armenian living in Syria, which was, one of the points of the archive. Here are some other testimonies, and of course, there are many, many testimonies, and choosing one over the other doesn't mean anything about them. Everybody's story is really valuable, and so again, you can read them later on if you'd like. But we do have a version, I should have said, we do have a version of the website that is live. The first version, we are making the new version now, which is the one that I showed you. But if you'd like to see any of these people's stories, you can just go to rerooted.org. But I love Sosi Ohan's testimony here, for example, this piece of it. She said, "We love being Armenians so much. We were from the ones who were freed from the genocide. Those who survived the genocide or the elderly would say, if only there was some Armenian dirt to put on our graves. Now in Armenia, the dirt is something plain here, but I can't throw it away. In Armenia, if there is some dirt in a bag of vegetables, I cannot throw it away. I throw it outside. In Armenia, every place that I go, I feel more like God created this life for me. I only wish that there were good work in the homeland. If there was only good work, people and their children could feel better here." And then, Coco here talks about the good relationships with other communities outside the Armenian community, and Dr. Toronian is very interesting seeing the generational differences across the communities because not everybody's going to have the same testimonies, and that's the beauty of the oral history is that people say different things. And so Dr. Toronian was one of the first generations that had come to Syria. And he says, "In my childhood years, we never interacted with Arabs. Why? Because all the Armenians were living in the same place. Everything was Armenian, the shopkeeper, the baker, the cobbler, the tailor. We did not need anything else. Armenians were living collectively with each other. At the school, when the Arab teacher used to come and say, 'This is an Arab country,' we didn't understand. What does that mean? What is an Arabic country?" And so there are so many different facets of each person's interview that you never know what they're going to say, what kind of tidbit or insight they're going to shed light on for the community. And I think oral history is beautiful in that sense. So the last couple slides, and I want to open up for questions, is just talking about, so I said that the title of this presentation is Oral History and Law and Justice. And so how do those things come together? So I guess I wanted to just give one, I can tell you, I hope that I showed you in the beginning that there are ways for them to supplement one another because oral history can fill in gaps of the others, etc. But I want to show you through this one concrete example that I have, how I think it can help. So as the ICTY emphasized and we discussed, we need to focus on voices from the ground to make sure the justice that we seek is what the people want and that it includes diverse perspectives that help reconcile conflicting interests. So I went for my thesis, for my master's thesis, I went back to Armenia after having collected 150 interviews in the past, Rerooted, and I wanted to ask the Syrian Armenians this question: what would justice look like for you in a post-conflict Syria? What would make you feel like there has been justice with regard to the Syrian conflict? I will talk about the IIIM in a minute, but going to the next slide, I don't know how well you can see this, but basically these are the results from my survey tool. So I made this survey and I asked them, what would justice feel like for you for Syria and for the Armenian genocide? And I listed some different things, and it was interesting that was just an interesting study in my mind of how justice might be different for different contexts, but also to look at the post-conflict Syria. It was very interesting to see we have here an apology, a memorialization, official recognition, some of those things, as you can see in the parallel between Armenians for the Armenian genocide, official recognition of the genocide by Turkey. And this was only a 50 participant survey. So there aren't, it doesn't have any type of statistical validity, or it's not representative, but it does show people's attitudes. So 42 of the 50 said that they wanted official recognition of the genocide by Turkey, which is understandable because that's something that Armenians have not had, and it's a big element of what will make us Armenians feel heard and restored dignity. But for example, with Syria, that was not so much something that people wanted. And the problem with these kinds of yes or no answers, or saying, checking the box, yes, I'd like this, is that people might think, okay, of course, yes, sure, I would like a lot of it. Let me just check them all. But one of the benefits of oral history is that it can help provide the context of why they want those things. And so I wanted to show also here that I have a table for retributive justice. And as I mentioned before, the Syrian Armenian informants that I spoke with were not so adamant on retributive justice. That wasn't their immediate concern right now, because they're still in the midst of rebuilding their communities and trying to survive. And so I want to talk about the priorities for Syria, which I found after my interviews was ensuring the safety and stability of the Armenian community in Syria, protecting the rights of all liberties of all citizens, rights and liberties of all citizens, and recreating a unified Syria. So, those charts that I just showed you didn't demonstrate that this is what they wanted. It just showed you that they wanted a recognition, they wanted a memorialization, and whatever else it showed you, but it doesn't really explain why. And it's not so helpful to transitional justice if you just have, what people want. I think it's much better when you put the yes/no answer alongside why somebody wants that, and that's how you can better understand how to reconcile everyone's interests. So for example, protecting the rights and liberties of all citizens. Well, why? Or ensuring the safety and stability of the Armenian community. Why is that a concern for them? Well, because as I, have showed it, as I learned in my, interviews with people about the political context of growing up in Syria during Pan-Arabism, for example, people felt repressed. They felt that they couldn't publicly express being Armenian. They had to hide learning Armenian in Armenian schools, hide learning their religion. And then when the new regime, the Assad regime, had taken over, Armenians got some of those rights back. And so protecting the rights and liberties of all citizens and ensuring safety and stability is something important for many Syrian Armenians, because if there is a transitional government, if there is a change to a new government, they want to make sure, and I'm saying they, but I can't generalize, and that's hopefully one of the points I've demonstrated about oral history, is that while you can understand a community, you can't, the point of it is to highlight these different perspectives so that you can't really generalize, but it's important to understand the historical context of why they want what they want. And so if there's a new transition, a new government, many Syrian Armenians want to make sure that their rights aren't taken away like they were in the past, or minimized. So that is this idea of moving from positions to interests is a negotiation term. And I like that there's an orange anecdote that I can explain later in the questions and answers if you'd like. But I think it's an interesting way to understand how to bring conflict resolution to a society through understanding what the people on the ground want and why they want it. So I want to end by showing you this quote. It's one of my favorite quotes that I learned from oral history. I was in one of my oral history classes. It's from a book called Ethical Loneliness. And it says, ethical loneliness is the experience of having been abandoned by humanity, compounded by the experience of not being heard. And so oral history is one of the ways to remedy that feeling of ethical loneliness. I wanted to just thank you all for listening. And this is a picture of Ani and I with one of our narrators. And we'd love to hear from you on our social media and answer any questions you have now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was very, very interesting, and especially the Institute has been involved with a handful of oral history projects, and I had the opportunity to actually interview a few Syrian Armenian newcomers to Canada. So I found this really interesting and I learned a lot, so thank you so much for this presentation. And I did, when you had asked the question about what type of oral history project someone would start, I did miss a few of the answers that were posted in the Q&A chat box. So I'll read those out first and then we'll go into some of the questions. So somebody said, I think I would start an oral history archive on the LGBTQIA+ community, with a specific community that doesn't necessarily allow these stories to be on the forefront of national history. So that was one.
I think that's fantastic. And there actually, I know in one of my oral history classes, we had learned about a number of archives that did focus on this community, and I think there's probably never enough because, you know, each different community within that larger community has different perspectives and narratives. So I think that's a fantastic idea, and I want to say one of the reasons I brought up this question is because you know, I think everybody, if they want to, has the tools to do something like this, to go into your own community or community. And you have to, you know, Ani and I did a lot of preparation by going to oral history trainings and workshops, but I don't think it's something that you should say, oh, I'm going to leave it to somebody else to do if it's something you really want to do. So that's a fantastic idea, and thanks for sharing.
Thank you. Okay, so another answer was, an oral history I would focus on is children who are 5 to 8 years old, to be able to grow up with them and determine discrepancies and struggles and motives in education.
Oh, interesting. So that's really fascinating. And I wonder, so 5 to 8 year olds, there would be probably a number of consent issues there. And it's not impossible, but I wonder if maybe whoever wrote this, maybe if you'd also like to think about including the parents of 5 to 8 year olds. Maybe you were thinking that, and I'm being too dense. But I think that that's fantastic, and those kinds of initiatives. When I say justice, yeah, you know, you can determine. I spoke about justice in the sense of mass atrocity, but there's a lot of other types of justice that are needed in everyday domestic life, like that kind of equality of education. So thanks for putting that forward. And if anybody wants to expand on any of these, please feel free to.
Yes, please raise your hand if you want to say anything about those. And so now for our first question, what was the biggest challenge you faced when conducting these oral history interviews for Rerooted?
Thank you. So I think maybe there are a number of challenges, of course, but maybe one of the biggest challenges was trying to make sure that the narrators always felt that they were speaking like of their own volition, and they were saying what they wanted to say. And so we always began the interview by saying, you know, these are the 5 parts. Well, we always ask people first, do you want to be, you want to have video? There's also the option for just audio. There's the option for anonymity. And a couple people definitely took us up on that. And you know, when people were conflicted sometimes, they wanted to speak, but then were nervous and didn't know if they were going to say something that they didn't like and they wanted to take out. And so we'd also always reassure people that, you know, this is yours, this is your story. If you decide tomorrow, if you decide next year, if you decide in 10 years that you don't want this to be public anymore, you just tell us, and that's your prerogative, because these are for you. And so I think that maybe the hardest thing was trying to make sure people felt that even when they were saying some of the hardest things that they were going through. It seemed like at times they wanted to stop, and so we would of course always let people stop, but then it wasn't up to us. It was their internal conflict that they had to manage, whether they wanted to continue or not. And it was hard to make sure that we were always well, we made sure that we were always saying that, but it was hard to, I guess, watch people continue, even if you could tell that they were conflicted about it. And there are different things you can do in those situations. Pause the interview, stop, we can redo it another day. And so, but I think that was, I don't know what the hardest part was, but that was a challenge.
Mm-hmm. And how did you get started with this project, and how about the funding?
So in college, there were a number of grants that were open to me as a college senior. There was Fulbright, so I applied for the Fulbright research grant to do this project. I applied to 3 different grants to do this project, and I got one of them along with Ani. We got the Davis Projects for Peace grant, and so that's a grant that gives you a sum of money to go during the summer after any year in college, really, actually. And I went after my senior year, and initiate a project for peace. And so they accepted our proposal, and that's how we got the initial funding. And then we've applied to other funding mechanisms to try to continue the project, because there are a lot of people that believe in the power and importance of oral history, and we're really grateful for that. And I should name some of the donors, of course. So the Davis Project for Peace, and then we had the Gulbenkian Foundation, which was incredible. The Pomegranate Foundation through Carla Garabetian helps us a lot, and hosts a lot of our functions. And there are private donors who I think aren't disclosed.
And something you kind of addressed throughout your presentation is the humanization aspect of oral histories. So this question, do you think oral histories can help humanize legal processes, and which can be quite cold or procedural in a sense?
Yeah, I think they can. I think so. I'm a law student. I'm a second year at Harvard. So I haven't yet worked with individuals in a legal setting, besides when I had done some asylum work, and I worked with people who were seeking asylum, and that was actually really meaningful. But in those asylum hearings, actually, or in those cases, a lot of what we were doing was understanding the person's whole life and understanding the country conditions that led this person to leave their country, understanding the context of what was happening and how they were living. And so actually, I thought those were really, really great interviews that I did with those people, because even though there was this, I guess, cold procedural sense that they were going to have to go explain this in front of a judge and have it judged or an asylum officer, and have it judged on the merit, on its merit, on whether this person should be able to stay in the country or not. I think that the process of preparing for that was maybe more holistic than maybe trying to find the pieces of somebody's story that's going to make them win the case. And again, I can't say much about legal because I haven't yet worked a lot in that, but I can say that with oral history, I think 100%, when I go in and I tell somebody, tell me about yourself, or I say, here, we're so excited to hear your perspectives on what it was like growing up in Syria and what it means to you to be Armenian, and for you to tell us what you want to say. I think it makes things easier and, again, more collaborative and less pressure. And I think that can help get rid of this cold procedural sense that you're speaking of.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And do you think oral histories will help move transitional justice tools forward? I'm thinking specifically of case-by-case approach and listening to the people.
So I think so. So for example, let's think about a transitional justice tool of memorialization. I don't know if you've seen, this is really cool to me, the Holocaust holograms, Holocaust survivor holograms. Mm-hmm. If you haven't seen it, you should look it up, but it's these Holocaust survivors that have been interviewed in this green screen dome with many cameras around them, and they've chosen to do this. And they become a hologram that then is in museums and museums. And the point of it was to eternalize that. That's what they said, to eternalize these histories, because they said, what happened? The people who created this said, what happens when the last Holocaust survivor dies? Are these stories going to die with them? And of course, so much of it is written down, but nothing compares to hearing somebody tell their story and what they went through. And having that kind of empathy and emotional moment. And so what you can do is you can ask the hologram. You can say, which concentration camp were you sent to? Can you tell me your favorite food? There's so many different conversations that you can have with them. They programmed a number of different, I think, thousands upon thousands of questions, and they want these people to live these stories and to live on forever. And so So your question was, yeah, do I think oral histories will help move transitional justice tools forward? So yes, so that is an example of memorialization, that these people will be memorialized now forever in a way. And then what else can case by case oral histories do? Well, it can help with historical dialogue. If you want to have some type of understanding of what happened, you know, you can bring in people's testimonies and stories to say, well, you know, your community was hurt and so was ours, and we were hurt in so many ways. And I think there's no way to do it without oral histories, because how can you, I don't know, how can you talk about reconciliation or restorative justice between peoples if you don't hear people's full life stories? That's my opinion, but maybe I'm biased because I really like oral history.
No, I think that's a great answer. And we have two other questions, both kind of related, kind of new ways to conduct oral history, or maybe an alternative to an oral history. So one of them is the nature of how we tell stories is quickly changing. Do you think podcasts could be interpreted as oral history?
That's a fantastic question. I wouldn't say that, actually, because I'm thinking podcasts are more telling the facts of, and sorry, but I should qualify this with, I think somebody else could say they are. But my opinion is that I don't think they are, because I think that, you know, oral history has this benefit of being able to have somebody express their understanding of trauma through their life narrative. And I think that when I think of podcasts, I think of the news, or I think of people who are commenting on a book review. But if you give me a more specific idea of what kind of podcast you're thinking of, if it is an interview about somebody's life, then yeah, I think that could be an oral history. But I don't listen to too many podcasts, so maybe I'm not understanding what you're thinking of. So if you wanted to clarify that, I'd be happy to, or even speak. I don't have to just, you know,
Yeah.
you guys can
If you want to raise your hand. I know there are a few podcasts that kind of do dive into the life story. I'm thinking more like a celebrity or an expert on something. They do dive into like background and stories that way. But maybe you're thinking of a specific one that you'd like to share. While maybe they raise their hand or add, do you have any advice for people who want to start an oral history project in the era of COVID-19?
Yes, I think that's fantastic. I think if you wanted to get in touch with the Oral History Master's Program at Columbia, I think they are doing something on that. But of course, you also can and should think about starting your own project. And I have in the bibliography that I can send, I have a number of guides that talk about what to keep in mind when you're trying to start an oral history, and how to. There's so many things I didn't say about the process of what it's like to actually interview, and how to prepare yourself, and how to prepare the interviewee. And I guess my first tip would be, my first thought would be to figure out what the purpose of it will be. So my purpose was to capture a snapshot of this displaced community that it doesn't exist anymore in the way that it is. And so because of that, I asked questions about what were the communities that you were involved in Syria? Which church did you go to? Which Armenian community? What was your relationship like with non-Armenians? I wanted to capture a picture of what life was like when Syria had a very vibrant Armenian community, not affected by war. So think about, I guess, what you want to do, and there can be many efforts, many aims and goals that you want from this archive. But think about what you want the project to do. And I forgot to mention. I said I'd mention the IIIM, and I didn't. But I was going to say that in this idea of many aims, yes, our main aim was to capture the snapshot of what Syrian Armenian life was like before the war, and to preserve it. But also, as I said, to contribute to any justice efforts that might happen in the future. And the IIIM is a mechanism for Syria that is documenting a lot of, documenting as much as they can atrocities that have happened in Syria. And then they are preserving those testimonies and saving them, and also providing them as resources for prosecutors in Europe, or anybody who might, be trying to build a case against any type of Syrian actor who had, or actor in Syria who had perpetrated any crimes. So my point was going to be that there's different aims. So we have the aim of preserving the history, but also the aim of contributing to justice should there ever be a desire and a need for it. So, so your aim can be multifaceted is the main point.
Great. Well, once again, thank you so much to our presenter today, Anoush, and thank you for all the participants for participating in today's webinar. There are a few things that we do want to remind you before we sign off today. If you haven't already, don't forget to register for our next webinar. It'll be taking place next Tuesday at 4 p.m. We'll be discussing the Yazidi Genocide, Children's Experience of a 21st Century with Caroline Schneider. And finally, the Genocide and Human Rights University program at the University of Toronto is tentatively scheduled for summer 2021. We're hoping that it's safe to travel and everyone can make it to Toronto. So for more information about this program, please visit our website and feel free to send us an email if you do have any questions. And we look forward to receiving your applications in January 2021. Anoush, thank you so much again.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for listening. Thank you to the Zorian Institute for having me. It really means a lot.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Have a good night. Good Thanksgiving if you celebrate.
Yes, happy Thanksgiving. Take care.